Hello, and the voice you're listening to belongs to me, Hannah H. Tarindwa. I have an honors in Media and Society Studies and a master's in Monitoring and Evaluation. In addition, I am part of the Toastmasters Leadership Institute, where we do training for speaking and leadership. I'm a writer, editor. I'm a professional speaker, as already stated, and a creativity consultant. I will be giving you my details at the end of this presentation. Today, we are going to be exploring the areas where communication for development matters. These areas are the ones that usually are looked at a large community or societal level in development, as the agenda will show. So, the contents of this presentation includes an overview of the areas where communication for development matters, and those areas are health, social work, environment, education, water and sanitation, youth development, gender, and agriculture. Now, an overview of this presentation is that for C4D works at all these what end up being a wholesome approach to society. So you have your head of communication for development. That person is responsible for ensuring that capacity building is obtained, who coordinates facilitation, who advocates for the project, the multimedia and printing that is required, development campaign change, so where you have the campaigns that need to be taken and community mobilization and participation within the projects. I hope it will be clearer as I explain more and more. Let's start with health. Health affects everyone in the world, whether rich or poor, and therefore it is a national interest topic. It is therefore it's something that we look at when we're talking about development. And essentially it must be communicated if there are projects to do with health. And when we talk about that, we use comprehensive media for the community, as well as medical support staff to coordinating facilitation of the projects that might need to be implemented. And how do you get advocates? So when you talk of advocacy, you're saying you get community leaders and elders to advise on the health interventions. Sometimes you'll find that people will come in and they'll say, we want to help with an intervention. The project is for malaria in a place where there is no mosquitoes. It makes no sense. So it's important to get the advice and set up an advisory council of elders and leaders. Then when you are talking of multimedia and printing, so use various media to share the information. Because health is for everyone, you're going to use all and different types of platforms. So for example, pamphlets, you can use theater and TV and radio in various forms. Of course, advanced countries will even have the development issues put in a series sort of way. So you can have, like in America, they might have Chicago MD, whereas in Africa, I can't really think. I think, they might have been Yizo. Yes, Yizo in South Africa was speaking about HIV, AIDS, but it had so many components to it. But that is part of communication for development. So you've got a TV series that comes in and speaks to health issues included. Right, so you find in these days of COVID, there's been some videos, adverts that you'll find that speak to any developments that might need to be addressed. And then development campaign change. So this is now you are talking about the change in the campaign. So you create awareness at individual and group levels. When we talk of individuals, when people visit the clinics, you ask them questions. Do they know what is happening? Do they understand what they are required to do? Whether it's mothers with new babies, all those issues have to do with health. Old people who come in for their checkups, or people with recurring medical issues. Nurses and women in general tend to be more participative in health issues, so therefore men need motivation to be part of the participation. Moving on to social work. Now, social work is about making the lives of people more comfortable, that people interact in a responsible manner, and this, of course, this means that community engagements through organized programs with leaders and affected members of society. When we talk of leaders, we're talking parents, and even just the people, youth who tend to be influential. And when you look at advocacy, you look at issues to do with inequality are highlighted and possible solutions are explored. So what are the inequality, what shows inequality in the society that makes people respond or act in one way or another? So most of the time, the social work, you find basic material is required. Obviously, that you can also have spoken word, but basic material usually works. Development campaign change. Now you are looking at policy reviews. Now this is at a higher level, restructuring. Policy reviews, restructuring, and implementation. That means that you might need to look at how are certain groups of people in society approached, whether it's old people, young people, middle-aged, professionals. What are the policies in place that help them to thrive and survive within the society, and how are issues resolved at a personal level? And so social workers need to work with that information, and they can only get it through public consultation and information sharing. Okay, to mobilize the community, they need to get various members of society to participate in activities that benefit their communities. And so this can be artists, these can be just leaders of social groups, so whether it's writers, guitar players, those sort of things. They might seem small, but they do contribute to social work. And then finally, how the environment is about where we stay, our area of comfort, where we grow our food, where the places where everything happens. So it's important that we consider it in development and know how to development. Now, the people who coordinate any projects that have to do with environment are the line ministries, together with environmental groups, experts in various aspects of the environment. So, for example, geologists and meteorologists, they can help. You use environmentalists for advocacy and advice, because these are people who look at the problems that are facing the environment, and most of the time actually have solutions, and those problems and solutions need to be communicated well. In terms of using multimedia or printing, using posters is most of the times what is the method of communication. Posters, documentaries, you find that there's so many documentaries on Planet Earth or National Geo, or even just documentaries that can be used in private settings like schools about certain environmental issues that might be occurring and affect a specific society or community. Reports, of course, are needed for line ministries to truly understand, and for other experts to see how they can also chime in if there's need, and then flyers for students, younger people, to also get into the program. Policymakers are expected to be the champions of campaign change and international agreements. So, for example, last year there was, of course, the International Environmental Forum that happened in Europe, and people have to agree on their emissions of gas and how much water they need to use, what policies they need to put in place in their own countries to ensure that the environment remains sustainable for future generations and the present. Community mobilization is expected, of course, of all members of society who are able. So in terms of, teachers, parents, bosses, employees, all those people, they need to get together, because we are all part of this earth. This is the habitable place that we have right now, where we live out our lives, and so it's important that everybody participates. And then how is the capacity building is done through having protected areas. So for example, you still, in as much as development is happening in terms of houses, humans are growing, architecture, buildings, there's also a need to have protected environments where the wildlife is kept wild. So issues such as places such as game reserves should be put into place. Research stations are also important to build capacity so that the environmentalists and other experts have those places by which they can study the trend and know what is coming for the future. Now, education, of course, has evolved into different aspects and different types of education. In Africa, we've had our own sort of word of mouth education where children were taught through stories or through experience by helping on the household or going out hunting and gathering. But of course, education has changed and is continuing to change. Some systems are a bit out of place, and sometimes it might happen because of colonization or some agreements that might have been heard, and it's very difficult to change an education system, but it's important to provide infrastructure for that change and tools for communication of that change. People who are in charge of coordinating and facilitating the educational projects are usually line ministries and heads of schools. So when we talk of heads of schools, principals, owners of training facilities, that sort of stuff. The people who can advocate and advise are obviously influential parents and support organizations. You find that there are some other organizations that support schools. So, for example, publishing companies or uniform places, those sort of things, depending on the schools. And even now, schools have changed definition. They've moved online. And so it's important to have those organizations that support them to be on the advisory councils. Various media, depending on the recipients, is needed to show the communication. So it depends, because there's so many issues to look at when you're thinking of education. There's demographics, there's literacy in itself. So you might want to communicate an issue about how learning is changing to grandparents or parents, and you'll find that in Africa you do have some countries until today where there's less than 50% literacy rates, or literacy rates are as low as 60%. That is not a good rate, because it helps when everyone is educated at least to the point of being able to read their own names and write. That way they can not, most of the time they're not tricked into issues. But you see, with education it becomes complicated because not everyone can understand everything. So for example, legal matters. There are, of course, policies. You cannot explain policies, or the way you explain a policy to a person who left grade 7 is going to be different from someone who actually studied legal studies. And even people who are educated, they might be educated in engineering, but that does not mean they understand law. So all these will need various types of media to explain. For development campaign change, you need heads of departments and program leads to actually develop those campaigns. And community mobilization requires a combined efforts of the teachers, the parents, the students, cultural groups, because education should have, in my view, it should have a purpose. So you're not just going to teach a child Pythagoras theorem just for the fun of it. There has to be a reason behind it. You want them to be able to be analytical thinkers, to be able to be mathematically inclined. Yes, of course, everyone is going to use maths, but the level that they're going to use mathematics is different. Therefore, all these things need to be addressed, and they need to be communicated well. Now, water and sanitization is separate from the environment for the one good reason. It's about waste and cleaning up and so on and so forth, and food actually. So, but water, as they say, is life. It's important that people have clean, reliable sources of drinkable water, as well as proper sanitation. And until now in Africa, you have a very big lag. We cannot talk about the fourth industrial or the fourth digital revolution with whilst there's some people who do not have basic toilets in their yards, who are still using the bush. So that needs to be addressed. These are some of the development projects that are still being undertaken in the context of rural Africa and even urban Africa. In 2018, Namibia had a case of hepatitis, and we know that quite a number of people died from it, and that is because of the lack of proper sanitation. Right, so you need town councils to work together with water plant owners and of course line ministries. They'll always be part of that, the C4D. And you also need community leaders, health workers, and educators to be part of the advisory and advocacy role, right? They need to make their committees so that they can advise and advocate for the communities that need these water sanitation facilities. It's good to use broadcast, print, and internet media for educating people who are within the situation and those who can help the situation. So it can be direct and indirect. For development campaign change, you need the governments and the local councils, because most of the time it's very difficult for one individual to just have a good toilet system when there are no pipes to carry out the waste to safe places for everybody. So it's important that this is looked at from very high levels. And then of course community mobilization and participation. This one is required of media houses. The media houses need to do campaigns, adverts, programs to do like talk shows or even television programs that speak to the issues of water and sanitation. And I've seen and heard community radios do quite a lot. For example, in 1993 in Zimbabwe, where there was a break of cholera, there was the issue more than just the disease that was affecting people. The issue was about water and sanitation and the good use and good sources. And so that was required of media, had to do campaigns in order to inform people of the situation. Now the youth, of course, are the future of the country. Without any youth, countries do not have hope of surviving. People grow old and therefore eventually die. And so if a nation doesn't invest in its youth, it's investing in failure. Youth need places to meet, whether it's for education, entertainment, or just to interact with each other. So there's need for centers, and online platforms are also part now of that capacity building function, because the youth have access to technology, lots of them, whether most of the time it doesn't really matter if it's urban or rural youth, particularly in Africa, where the mobile phone is a fast-growing gadget that facilitates communication. Right, so you also need social workers and educators to be part of the coordinating and facilitation of any youth programs. Social workers, most of the time, of course, you need experienced ones who know what the youth go through in their social settings. Then for advocacy and advisory, you need youth workers and legal practitioners who can help in establishing policies that help the youth meaningfully. And then how do you communicate them in terms of multimedia and printing, social media, Facebook, Instagram? Sometimes they're just moving. TikTok is the current high. It's short videos, 5 minutes being the maximum now, But you find that the youth, they like to listen to things that are even 15 seconds short. So you've got from 15 seconds, 60 seconds, a minute, all the way to 5 minutes. So it's important to understand what they are using. So you also have jingles. Jingles are short musical adverts that are repetitive and stick in someone's head. Pop music, of course, pop music, really popular music, really has an impact on what the youth will do or how they'll feel about a certain issue and how they'll act. And then t-shirts amongst other clothing. So you'll find when a strong brand such as Nike says just do it, it actually affects and motivates the youth. For development campaign change, you need the youth leaders and advisors, of course, and the line ministry, of course, is part of that, because, of course, the youth might think that they know what they want, but advisors of elders can actually help them in some places where they might not be very clear. Finally, all able youths should be able to be part of community mobilization and participation. Mainstream media should also be part of that. Now, looking at gender, when we speak of gender, we're talking about male and females, and whether we like it or not, society has for the past millennia functioned based on whether people are male or female. But now you find that there's some things that are happening within the society that shortchanges one or the other depending on the time and space. So we need community leaders to coordinate and facilitate gender mainstreaming and gender equality. And this can be done by educating and informing both genders on the things that they are able to do. We need social workers, religious and community elders, psychologists and legal practitioners to be part of the advocacy and advisory teams. All possible media can be used. We need activists and policymakers to develop campaign change. And then we need all leaders and communities to be part of the mobilization and participation. Finally, agriculture. Now, agriculture is about food security for people. When we're talking about agriculture, we need to build capacity by providing adequate and proper land, which allow long leases to deserving farmers. So that means that how do we get to the point of saying someone is deserving? Simple. People who produce and do so consistently, and people who are able to adapt to the changing environment. So this means that these farmers are aware, they're smart enough to know what is needed when it's needed. But people cannot practice agriculture without adequate and proper land. So it's important that farming experts, geologists, and meteorologists also act in coordinating and facilitating any communication for development with regards to agriculture. We need governments and farmers' unions to be part of advocacy and advisory teams. Most times, farmers are a mixture of educated and the uneducated, and I mean this in terms of formal education. And so most of their media should be multimedia in terms of voice and images, but you find that pamphlets also work for, even if they are in the form of infographics, as long as the farmers or potential farmers also get to see what's happening in terms of development in their society. Policymakers and unions need to also be part of development campaign changes, and line ministries, chiefs, leaders of farmers unions are the people who lead the community mobilization and participation. So I hope that you now understand the areas where communication for development is necessary all those areas are important for national development, or even just development in general for the human race. And so now that you've learned, I hope it becomes part of you, remembering that what we learn becomes part of who we are. This presentation has been brought to you courtesy of Open Creativity, sharing knowledge from Africa to the world. These are my contact details. If you've got any questions or you've contributions, please feel free to send me an email on maccafrica@gmail.com.